Good morning and welcome to Florida Watch. I'm your host, Doug Miles, and joining me today on the panel are Dennis Maley, the editor of the Bradenton Times, Cooper Levey-Baker, he's the editor of the Florida Independent, and sitting in for Gary Schuster this week is Tom Tryon, the opinion editor of the Sarasota Herald Tribune. Tom, welcome to the panel today. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Our first topic today is immigration reform, which is quickly gaining steam in Tallahassee. And Cooper, I know you've been following this very closely. It's been kind of a controversial bill being bandied about, hasn't it?
Yeah, there's actually a few different proposals that vary in pretty important ways. And of local note, State Senator Mike Bennett from here in Bradenton just withdrew his bill from the State Senate this week. So that's a big move. And so what you have right now is in the State Senate, you have sort of a softer version of the law, focused more on enforcement after someone has been arrested, also focus on programs like 287G, which is sort of a information fingerprint sharing database. But in the State House, sponsored by a guy named William Snyder from Stewart, you still have that same Arizona-style hardline bill, and the two are really at odds. And so I think we're going to see a lot of debate here over the next couple of weeks. You're going to have a lot of sort of, I think, intense discussions. And this isn't just an issue within the state legislature, but I mean, you have Tea Party groups who are pressuring definitely for a really hardline bill. You've seen some pro-immigration rights rallies being held in Tallahassee this week, and so it's also a popular issue. And so I'm curious to see if the legislators are going to really respond to that popular pressure, or if they sort of know exactly kind of what they want to accomplish already. We'll see.
You know, I think Senator Bennett's bill being withdrawn is a big victory locally because there was tremendous pressure upon him from a coalition of immigration support groups. Unidos Now, which is spearheaded by CJ Saza, was one of them. And, we saw that at the one meeting where, they came out en masse to really voice their opinion on that. So I think that's a good sign. But like Cooper said, there's still some fast-track bills going through that are hardline Arizona style that basically instruct or require an officer to engage in such profiling. These are dangerous. I think that what you're seeing is a couple issues at once. This is a red meat issue. This is something that the core of the party, that base, that Tea Party group, it's very important to them. It's not necessarily extremely important to the whole party, and they've got to be careful with that, because I think in 2006 Republicans learned a lesson when they tried to make immigration on a national platform a big issue. They lost a big part of the Spanish vote that they had, and they really tried to use it the same way they did gay marriage in 2004 as a wedge issue, and it came back and backfired. And that could happen now. Now, the second part, the under-the-scenes part, the behind-the-scenes part that you have going on is that there is a big movement with a lot of the privatized correction industries to help facilitate these laws getting passed. We've said before, GEO is the largest contributor to the Florida State Republican Party. They're a big advocate of this. In Arizona, that was completely driven by the privatized correction industry. One of the reasons is we've readdressed a lot of our sentencing guidelines 4 or 5 years ago, and we've had relatively flat prison population growth. They need one of two things. They need that to change, and this would be a great way to add a whole bunch of prisoners to the population, or they need to get their hands on privatized diversion programs, and they're trying to do both. That's how they're going to grow their industry and make the justification to try to get Governor Scott to privatize more of that. So that's the other battle you have being fought here.
Yeah, well, I think there's one other thing, or two other things actually. One is, people like Mike Bennett were hearing from county sheriffs. Brad Stubbe, Tom Knight, where they thought that they were going to be the ones on the front line. And I think you make a good point about the state prisons. But when these arrests are made, they are made at the local level, and the people are incarcerated at the local level, and that's where the costs are incurred largely. So you were hearing there. I think the other thing too is, let's don't forget, and particularly on some of the issues such as the E-Verify issue, when they were talking about doing just E-Verify for checking the identification of workers, associated industries went bananas and started asking for all these alternatives. So I think now you're also starting to hear from the business interests who do not want the very strict rules, particularly in agriculture and some of those industries. So I think you're right. There's the Tea Party folks, but there's also kind of the traditional big business Republicans,
right?
And then you have local government people who are saying, we can't accommodate these costs.
You bring up a great point. One with the local government costs, but then the other part is then there's that other element of the Republican Party that really doesn't want to get rid of the depressed wage of labor. And that, so you have the argument coming from the Tea Party side that, look, illegal immigration drives down the wage rate in the state, and it does. But then you have the other side is saying, hey, we kind of need that low wage rate, in certain industries. So you are going to see some push and pull within the Republican Party on that as well.
You're actually going to see, I think, a direct collision course between Mike Herodopoulos and Associated Industries on that point. There was actually an amendment to the state Senate bill this week that removed most of the E-Verify provisions. Herodopoulos just came out, I think, yesterday and said he definitely is going to be putting that back in there, which puts him at odds with some of the most powerful business lobbies in Tallahassee. So we'll really see kind of like, I think, sort of who has the upper hand in all those negotiations. I think going back to the State House law, one thing that, one of our writers pointed out is that this law has been defeated in Arizona. And so it's kind of mind-boggling, this push to pass a law that we know is going to get struck down. And it's obviously, aimed towards stirring up kind of like the populist base, getting people out to vote, getting people out to support them. But what's the sense of passing a law that is going to get defeated? I mean, I think that's kind of a major question that we haven't been asking people like William Snyder and other supporters, that kind of a hard line law here in Florida.
Yeah, I was at that meeting you mentioned about CJ Zaya at the Manatee County Chambers a couple of months back, and it got very heated. Of course, Mike Bennett was there. The whole delegation from Tallahassee was there. But he was very adamant at that meeting that he was going to control this bill as long as he was in charge of it. He'd be, he would make sure it was done the right way. Kind of surprising that he would pull the bill at this point, Cooper.
I mean, kind of. I mean, it's sort of unusual just because, he had sort of been out there on this issue, but he had never sort of been 100% behind it. I think at one point he said like he didn't even know if he would vote for his own bill. So it's not surprising, I guess, but it is, I think, a sign that the Senate is definitely not interested in passing a really hard-line law, and they're more interested in these other
I think it's a win-win for him because he can say, look, there's stricter, harder bills out there. He can pacify his base with that, and he can get his name and kind of his stink off of it.
Yeah, but you know what? I think he did come out very much in favor originally for an Arizona-style bill, but earlier this spring he wrote a guest for us saying that now the issue is complex. There are many things to consider. He pointed out that almost 10% of the people living illegally in Florida are here on expired visas. So he went through this kind of litany of explanations. So perhaps he saw the light, perhaps there's some different polling. I'm not sure, but he clearly moderated, I think, his views over time.
And let's not forget the political aspect of this in the Republican Party right now. It used to be that you can kind of write off and say, look, they're going to vote for us anyway, so we only have to pacify the base so much. We don't really want to rally the opposition, which they clearly did. But there's that new dynamic where we saw in the primaries last time around in 2010, they're not necessarily going to vote for you. They've got the resources in the organization now to bring somebody else into the primary and go after you. So that kind of red meat that used to kind of be, hey, we'll toss them out once in a while, it's become much more important. And you're seeing that especially with Rick Scott at governor, because you got somebody who doesn't have the traditional power structure behind him and only has that other element in the Tea Party. And he's pushing those buttons constantly. He's saying, hey, I support this, I drive this home. And if you don't get on the board, and it seems to me like Dean Cannon has, Mike Herodopoulos is trying to straddle that line. And like you said, it's going to be very interesting how that power play works out.
How much pressure or how much cost, obviously, does this put on local police departments, sheriff's departments, if they have to follow through on this, if it does pass? Everybody that you pull over, do you automatically have to check them? And does it really add that much cost? What we call, I guess, an unfunded mandate, right? Yeah.
Well, Sheriff Stubbe here in Manatee actually tried a variation of this, had his people go through the federal program to get funded, to get trained and funded, and he ended up stopping that because of budget cuts. So, that was fairly significant. In Sarasota, Tom Knight has this program where he has the ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement people, who essentially have office space there at the jail, and they come in about every couple of weeks and check the records of people, and they've deported about 100 or so people from the Sarasota jail. So I think there are some alternatives, and going back to that federal angle, maybe we may find that that's the most cost efficient if you're trying to do this job.
That's what the measures that the state Senate bill is emphasizing is those kinds of measures that, fingerprint sharing, sort of databases of information that local governments can share with ICE. And so that has been, I think, already in Florida, you've seen that implemented in a ton of local communities. The question I think that some of those programs raise really is who is getting deported. One of the sort of stated goals of it was to really remove people who were serious criminals who were also here undocumented. And what we found out kind of in a story we wrote was down in Collier County, a very small percentage of those who actually were deported or placed in this program were convicted of anything serious. And so it was more a sort of a roundup measure. And I think you have those same racial profiling fears, that if you sort of are driving without a license, you're subjected to a different system of justice than somebody, if you're based on whether you're from, Central America or whether you're from America. So I think that...
Or Eastern Europe for that point.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I think that all these programs have their problems, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they play out and how the money gets shifted around.
Yeah, I think so. I think you look at it and you say, in Manatee County specifically, they have an ICE officer assigned to the jail. But when you're doing it that way, when you're taking somebody who's committed a serious offense and then backtracking and saying, is this somebody that we should be deporting? Because then you're diverting the cost and getting rid of it. When you're pulling people over and putting them into the system, that's creating a cost. And when you look at the Manatee County Jail specifically, you've got about a 1,300 person capacity, but after 1,000, they have to open up the annex. And there's a tremendous expense for opening up that second facility. So right now, they're bouncing back and forth around that 1,000 number. When you have something like this that's going to spike that number, the cost of running that annex every day is going to be tremendous. And again, it's unfunded. So just like we talked about the pill mill database, there are all these things that the state is trying to push away and saying, we're going to put this all down on the county and put all these unfunded mandates there. You take care of it. The counties are coming back and saying, with what? Because we've seen their budgets.
Does this bill pass eventually? Let's go around the table. Tom, you think it's going to get through?
My guess is no.
I think there'll be a softer version of it. I think they'll water it down enough to please business interests, and we'll see if that's enough to kind of satisfy the Tea Party.
I agree. I think you're going to have a watered down measure. I don't think you're going to get an Arizona style through. I think you're going to have a watered down measure, and I think it's going to be a tug of war then, because if the Tea Party, these people are coming up and saying, we want to e-verify, period, end of story. We want the racial profiling, period, end of story. Will that be enough? I don't know. It might really have serious implications in 2012.
Let's move on to our second topic today. Of course, we all know what's going on over in Japan, obviously, with not only the earthquake, the tsunami, but the nuclear power plant situation over there. But to kind of bring it more locally, Dennis, I know you've been kind of following this from a local angle. What is the future of nuclear power in Florida, and is it the beginning of the end of nuclear power in general?
Well, the industry is coming out very quickly to say, no, it's not. And a lot of advocates are coming out to say, hey, listen, don't let this make you think any differently about nuclear energy. Hopefully, we do. A lot of people don't realize almost 20% of the energy in the state of Florida comes from nuclear. We've got 5 operational plants right now, and each Progress and FPL both have 2 more in the planning stages each, so 4 more additional. There are a lot of problems, and this just showed us one additional aspect of it, and especially that we're in a state that is in a danger zone with regard to hurricanes. So we could see similar type catastrophes here. So that's just one more element of why it's not the answer. There are a lot more. When you look at it, Florida has a very serious future water planning program or problem. We don't have enough sources of fresh water to continuously increase the output at the rate that we are. Within the next 20 years even, those plants are really taxed heavily. When you look at a nuclear power plant, these guys are permitted to use upwards of 100 million gallons a day. Okay, so it's not very effective in that sense. Now, when you look at things like the desal plant outside of Tampa that is running at a fraction of what its promised capacity was to produce more water at huge cost overruns, we're seeing that these solutions of, hey, let's just build more nuclear and build some desal plants and, all these ways that are incredibly cost expensive and aren't producing what they're promised at a tremendous subsidy from the taxpayer, I think they're showing they're not the long-term answer. And we're sitting here in the Sunshine State not investing in the solar energy that is the long-term answer. And we're watching China take a technology that we developed, and I think they have 3/4 of the world market share now at this point with the PV cell technology. So we're really watching somebody else eat our lunch on this, and it's a shame. And I hope, if nothing else, just like the Gulf of Mexico was going to help, us say, hey, maybe offshore drilling isn't the answer. I really hope this gets us thinking about nuclear and saying, you know what, we've got to look in a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that last point is kind of the one that I'm hitting on. And maybe I'm just very cynical about this, but I think when the Gulf oil spill happened last year, I personally believed it was going to be a really transformational moment for the state of Florida. I thought that we were going to really start getting serious about energy policy. We were going to sort of realize that whatever oil was to be found in the Gulf, in Florida state waters was not worth pursuing, certainly not worth endangering our beaches and our tourism for. And yet we're back where the public seems to endorse the idea of drilling in state waters again. And this is, less than a year after it happened. In fact, the anniversary is coming up here next month. And so the cynic in me says I don't think this is going to have any real impact. I don't think it's going to slow down any amount of progress that powerful groups like Florida Power and Light, Progress Energy are making in building these reactors. So I don't know. I mean, that's just sort of the pessimistic view, but I certainly don't think that Floridians are going to get a wake-up call about this. No.
Well, what concerns me is not perhaps as much the future moving forward in terms of new plants. But you have these existing plants, as you mentioned, this heavy dependence, and the trend in nuclear energy has been to extend permits for plants across the nation. So we're not going to back off. You're not going to take 20% off, wishes we might, off the power grid anytime soon. And in fact, like I said, if these trends are followed, the federal government will continue to extend plant life, which means, I think, raises the serious question of, are these plants current with the best codes? What kind of damage have they suffered? The tremendous heat causes cracking and those kinds of issues in the structures. So, it may well change some of the applications for some of these new plants you mentioned. But my fear is it won't do anything. Maybe, some fix-up kind of regulations.
Absolutely.
But we'll be left with those old plants, and it may be worse than having new plants.
That's a great point, Tom, because you're right that so much of the power grid is relying on that. Henry Raines, who does a local radio show on 1490 AM at 8 o'clock, did a great series this week rolling out a lot of the information about how poorly maintained these plants are. And again, you're talking for-profit power companies saying, well, we could redo this. Was only designed to work for 30 years. We're 50 years into it now. We can redo this reactor. It was really supposed to be torn down at that point, but we're going to get this permit extended. Most of the plants are not properly maintained. Truthfully, I'm a former military officer. My specialty was nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. And I will tell you that if anybody was going to run nuclear plants in the United States, I'd want the military to do it. Because the level of inspection that we had was tremendous. And everything in the military, when you look at their ability to maintain their equipment, to inspect their equipment, when you watch a rest and recovery period where you bring the equipment back from a 6-month deployment, and you see millions of dollars of equipment, they go through their maintenance and their inspections afterwards. It is a phenomenal process. And it's very, very impressive how efficiently they do that. And they go through by the book, step by step, and it's somebody's you-know-what if one of those steps aren't taken. There's 3 sets of eyes on everything. This isn't done in the private sector. In the private sector, this is what we're finding, is these inspections are just not done at all, and that, then it's looked at. In the military, we don't look at it with a budget. We look at it and say, this is the SOP, this is what gets done. They look at it and say, well, this is what we're supposed to do, but, this is what our stock share price is. I'm very, very uncomfortable about the fact that we're using something that is so eminently dangerous in the private sector in a for-profit situation like that. And I think it's a recipe for disaster. And if this doesn't show us, like Cooper said, if this isn't the wake-up call, I don't know what is. I don't know, maybe it has to happen here on our shores, unfortunately, but that would be a shame if we couldn't learn from this tragic event.
And the regulatory structure is only going to get weakened, I think. I mean, there's sort of no, there's very little movement on national state politics to, increase oversight of private industry. You see at the state level, regulation is the enemy. You have Governor Scott, who has said that, our unemployment is high because we have too much regulation and too much red tape. And as Dennis is talking about, there's all sorts of problems with these plants. Where is any movement that's going to call for stricter regulations going to come from? And how's it going to be successful? You're fighting against, some of the largest, most powerful corporations in Florida, and they have a very vested interest in sort of keeping the status quo. So
that's why I think Tom hits it on the head there with what do you do? Because if you're not building new plants, you can bet you're going to be extending the old ones.
Yeah, exactly.
But to take the other side a little bit, Dennis, obviously a terrible tragedy, and once, hopefully in a couple hundred centuries, what happened in Japan. But that was a relatively old plant, from built, I believe, in the early 70s. Aren't the newer ones much safer and built to withstand?
Okay.
Maybe not to that extent.
Yes,
but
they are. So it
less
brings up
so.
the point that we have much older ones and many more of them. Okay, that's one point. Secondly, at the end of the day, when you look at this, and so many people in politics do and say, well, this is the ultimate solution is always nuclear. When you look at it, it doesn't matter how safe you do a plant. You are dealing with a radioactive carcinogen that outlives us, generation afterwards, that you have to do something with. You have to bury or tune this someplace, somewhere, and take it through these dangerous situations. And again, it might be a once in 100 years type event when you have a storm or something like that, or any this volatility. But at the end of the day, do you really want to be betting your future on something that gives you that kind of exposure? Because I don't see any scenario where you're going to have a cellular meltdown or a solar meltdown. I've never heard of somebody dying in a solar plant. I've never heard of these kind of catastrophes associated with clean energies like wind and solar. The point is, they might not be there now yet, but it's only because we're continuously saying they're not there yet. You have to invest heavily for that to happen. I think that, you have a point, yes, we're doing it safer, but we're never going to have clean coal, clean nuclear, clean, safe ways to do this energy. We have to look at those alternatives and develop them.
Or if you go to Cooper's point, I mean, maybe we did have a solar meltdown. I mean, you had Charlie Crist coming into office. He brings in Arnold. You have this big summit. We're going to go green. You have Mike Bennett, number 2 in the Senate, pushing solar energy development, the Gulf oil spill, now this, and nothing. I mean, just almost no movement on this issue.
We're right back to the days when Ronald Reagan came in 1980 and took the solar panels off the White House.
Yeah, and it's really pretty amazing. And I think you're right. I mean, for years and years and years, for decades, the consistent message from Floridians and Poles was that we did not want offshore drilling. The gas prices spiked, that changed. Then you had the oil spill offshore. You had some erosion, and now it's starting to track back up as gas prices rise. So I think you're right. I mean, it's really a policy crisis and a mindset crisis that I think a lot of people find disturbing. So
doesn't it have to begin, though, somewhat where companies have to realize there's going to be an eventual profit for this? Because there has to be investment by big companies to go solar, to go these other safer routes. But until that's seen as something that can happen within the next 5-10 years, it's not going to happen.
But the big companies who are invested in these programs, they want guaranteed markets. And so they're looking for states to pass things like a renewable portfolio standard, which requires that a certain percentage of energy in the state come from renewable sources. What that does is that gives them a guarantee that they're going to have X number of customers and be able to make X number of dollars. And other states are doing this, and so Florida is losing out. I mean, we can say, yes, it would be great if companies would come here and invest, but other states are drawing those companies to them by passing these kinds of standards, and we're lagging behind. So there definitely is, I think, a huge need for leadership at the state level on this issue.
And we're still putting billions of dollars into incentives and subsidies into the oil industry. So that argument that, it's got to be the businesses, they don't do it in the industry that's on top. How are they going to catch up without that?
But, as much as it's easy to bash, the big power companies, I mean, I'm convinced FPL wants to do this. I think they need that portfolio relief so they can charge some higher rates to recoup some of their investments. But they want to do this. I'm convinced of that. They've done it in DeSoto County. They want to be able to do it at the parish plant. And that may not be the complete answer, but I think there is a lot of energy, no pun intended, from some of these big companies. And FPL has been a leader in the industry. That's not, that doesn't get you down to is my hot water heater, my house going solar, is that affordable? That's a tougher nut to crack. But on the large scale, I think it's ready to be done with some of that relief and some of the leadership on like you said, on the portfolios.
To get to that point, I mean, I think FPL has a huge hand in sort of dictating, how this comes out in Florida. And so, I think that they do, they have built solar plants and things like that. But I think you're also, if they really wanted to push for a state renewable energy standard, if they really got behind that, I have a hard time seeing that it wouldn't be successful. So I think that definitely they're part of that equation too, that they really need to step up and I think really push forward something like that.
Dennis, will the situation in Japan have a major effect locally on Florida, or will it be, the oil situation?
I think it'll be just like the oil. I think it'll be forgotten in no time.
Agree.
Tom, you think the same thing?
Probably. I think, unless we see radioactive clouds hovering over Sarasota Manatee.
Till a crisis situation hits,
Yeah.
nothing really
Yeah.
gets done. Well, we're down to that part of the program where in the final couple of minutes we go around the table and ask everybody what's on their mind today. Dennis, what's on your mind? You've had 2 weeks to think of something.
I have a good one. It has to do with energy, and it's really important, and there's going to be some movement on it. Right now, about a third of the price of a gallon of gas at the pump has to do with speculation on Wall Street, okay? And these futures trading and the deregulation that's happened ever since FDR, when if you wanted to trade in futures and oil, you had to take possession of the barrels physically, okay, and use them or sell them. Right now, because of the advances in technology and how fast these lightning trades go, oil is traded hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times without anybody ever taking possession of it. It drives up the price ridiculously. We need to roll that back. When people say drill, baby, drill, that's going to have very little to do with the actual price at the pump, because there's only about 2.5 weeks of U.S. consumption in Gulf of Mexico with the most optimistic industry analysis, okay? What we can do is we can roll this back. We can prevent that. The new financial reforms empower the CFTC to say there's no more speculation without taking possession, but they haven't had the votes to do it. That board is on 5 years, okay, appointment from the president. It's a 3-2 right now in favor of not doing it, but Michael Dunn comes up in June, and he's a Democrat appointed under the Bush era who said, I can't see any discernible reason that would affect prices, which is a completely moronic statement. But President Obama needs to stand up and appoint somebody who is, and get him confirmed and fight for that, that's going to overturn that. And that is maybe the most important election that's going to come through this year, is who takes that seat on that board and getting that change. Right now, they estimate the gas will be between $2 and $2.30 a gallon if it were not being able to be future traded without taking possession.
Dennis fired up from a week on vacation. Cooper.
I want to talk about Governor Rick Scott and transparency. This has been sort of a real problem with his administration since he came into office. Just this week, he launched a pretty farcical website called Your Right to Know, I believe, which purports to offer all sorts of insider information as to what's happening at the state level. And the sort of information that's afforded there is just a joke. You can look up all the salaries and pensions of state employees, but nobody within the Scott administration itself. So it's a way to sort of try to answer some of these transparency questions that he's come up against without actually sort of taking any stance on the issue. So I think it's a real problem, and I think Floridians deserve to know what their governor is up to.
Tom?
Okay. I think mine is, we know that the so-called merit pay bill for teachers passed this week, but as is often the case, the legislature has now delegated to the bureaucracy to come up with the formula. The formulas for determining how you measure teacher performance, student success, and they're tinkering with things called like the value-added formulas and stuff like that. I think that's going to be kind of the insider issue of how you come up with this, who comes up with it, and will it be something that is subject to lawsuit? And my guess is everybody's going to find this much harder to do than to talk about.
Gentlemen, a good discussion this week. Tom, thank you for joining us. Look forward to having you back with us again. And that's going to wrap it up for us this week. I'd like to thank the panel again. Also thank you for joining us, which of course you can do each week right here on METV, or watch us anytime at thebradentontimes.com. Until next week, I'm Doug Miles for Dennis Maley, Tom Tryon, and Cooper Levey-Baker saying so long, everybody.